Okay, it looks like the attendees are filling in. I'm going to give it, like before, I'm going to just wait about 30 seconds to a minute until our attendees are populated. And it looks like that's going on right now. Okay, I'm going to get started. It looks like everybody is being allowed into the webinar. Good evening. Welcome to the September CAC meeting being held this evening, August 31st, due to the holiday next week. This is our 6th CAC meeting of the year. My name is Evan Zelig. I am the elected chair. Also present is the vice chair, Lorena Barrera, and the meeting will be co-facilitated by both of us with Lorez Bailey also moderating the panelist discussion that we will be having later with Lorena. If anybody needs a Spanish translation, please use the app to raise your hand and let us know. Si hay alguien que necesita traducción en español, por favor suba la mano. And if we have anybody, I don't see anybody raising a hand presently for that purpose, but if I do see somebody, we will address that. If you do want Spanish translation, there is a globe at the bottom of your screen that will switch between English and Spanish for those purposes. From the agendas, we can see that public comments today should fall under the subject matter jurisdiction of the CAC. Public comment at the end will be time limited and apply only to action items. Action items are specified on the agenda. Time limitations are at the discretion of the director and the chair and may be adjusted to accommodate all speakers. Oral public comment on agenda action items is available during CAC meetings. The public is also invited to communicate with IOLERO staff and CAC members through email. Members of the public who would like to make statements that may exceed the time limits, suggest topics to be placed on future agendas, or suggest questions to be raised and discussed by CAC members or staff, may send an email addressing these matters to law.enforcement.auditor@sonoma-county.org. CAC members may not deliberate or take action items, or take action on items not on the agenda, and generally may only listen to the public comment. Should CAC members wish to deliberate on an issue raised during public comment, it may be placed on future agendas for CAC discussion and possible action. Materials related to an item on the agenda submitted after distribution of the agenda packet are available for public inspection at the IOLERO office, and you may contact us by email to get those documents as well. Here at the CAC, we've adopted a design team alliance. All are encouraged to engage in respectful, non-disruptive communication that supports freedom of speech and values diversity of opinion. Our design team alliance is a list of norms which describe the way the CAC wants to show up and be in the community while modeling collaborative behavior. We request that CAC members, staff, and the public follow the CAC's agreed upon design team alliance. Our design team alliance is as follows. Be tough on the topic, not on people. Respect others' perspectives. Respect time. Practice active listening to individuals. Be open-minded. Speak to others as you would like to be spoken to. Honor freedom of speech. And call each other in rather than calling each other out. For tonight's meeting, again, we will have public comments at the end. We will be limiting the public comments to 3 minutes at the discretion of the CAC. I do see we have about 65 attendees. Depending on the number of public comment, of people that wish to make public comment at the end, public comment may be reduced to 2 minutes to accommodate all speakers who wish to make comment. We can move on to roll call. At this point, I'd ask Lorena to please do the roll call for our CAC.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lorez Bailey,
Present.
Councilmember Dora Barrera,
Present.
Councilmember David Hernandez, Councilmember Jose Landaverde,
Present.
Councilmember Alma Roman Diaz,
Present.
Vice Chair Barrera, that's me, and Chair Evan Zelig.
Present. And again, I'd like to ask, if there is anybody who needs Spanish translation to please raise your hand on the app. Before we continue, I want to let the people joining us know that although we are going through an agenda that was set very recently, I do not want the people in attendance or any panelist or anybody watching to think that we are not mindful that since our last meeting, there has been yet another nationwide case. There's probably others we don't know about, but there's been at least one other nationwide case of yet another person of color shot in the back by police. While we may not be able to address that specific incident through our agenda today, I want those in attendance to know that we are mindful of the ongoing issues in our communities, in our country. We are doing our best to address these incidents and these shootings, these homicides, these murders as they take place. I never thought I'd say this, but there have been so many we can't keep up. But just know that the work of the CAC, the work of IOLERO is continuing down the path towards finding resolution within our communities and finding a way for this violence against our people of color in our communities at the hands of law enforcement to stop. So just because we aren't addressing that incident specifically in our agenda, make no mistake that it is on all of our minds and is being discussed. I'd like to turn the matter over to Carlene Navarro, our director, for a director's report.
Thank you, Evan. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I want to start out by taking a moment to acknowledge the police shooting of Jacob Blake, a Black man in Wisconsin that happened this past weekend, as just referred to by our chair, Evan Zelig. As we come together tonight to discuss restorative justice in a forum hosted by IOLERO, an office tasked with law enforcement oversight, I think it's important for us to say Mr. Blake's name and remember that this incident is one of the reasons why we do this work. The other reasons, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Jeremiah Chass, and Andy Lopez, to name a few, are reminders to us that it's important for us to work together to seek changes. With each of these incidents, there's a review of the case. And oftentimes the district attorney's office, the police agency, or the courts decide that while it's tragic, the actions of the officers are legally justified. Without getting into specifics about each individual case and whether those legal decisions are appropriate, I think that we can all agree that legally justified or not, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the disproportionate incidence of force and death among people of color, and Black men in particular in our country. We have to create a space for a dialogue led by the people impacted most by what is happening about how we might create a change. And there is no one solution, you guys. We have to talk about the citizen complaints and how to make that process more transparent. We have to talk about the legislative process and how we change laws. We have to talk about community policing to work together with our law enforcement officers to build healthier relationships between police and the community so that we can see each other as people and not just as a suspect or a badge wielding bully. There's a time for protest and for the power of disruption, but there's also a time for respectful conversation where we make room for each other's opinions and viewpoints, and we look for a pathway towards restoration. We're not limited to discussing one solution at any given time. We're not restricted to one expert's opinion on restorative practice or one philosophy about how law enforcement oversight should be done. We have to make room for all of those voices, all of those ideas, and all of those potential solutions, and we have to do it together. Restorative justice is about improving and repairing relationships between communities and law enforcement. In the aftermath of Mr. Blake's shooting, necessary conversations should and will be had about criminal charges, civil liability, and strengthening law enforcement oversight. But there's no better time than now to have a discussion about repairing relationships. Since sending out the invitation for this meeting, IOLERO has received interest from other community members about being panelists on this topic and experts in the field of restorative justice who are interested in working with us here in Sonoma County. We are not expecting to solve these issues at one meeting, but we're hoping to support each other and provide resources and experience-based ideas to start a discussion that will hopefully lead to another discussion and hopefully eventually lead to solutions. With that, I want to thank Kimmy Barbosa Soyero for raising the importance of restorative justice and breathing life into this forum tonight. I want to thank Delashay Carmona Benson for leading discussions in our community about criminal prosecutions and CPS. I want to thank Lorez Bailey and Lorena Barrera, our other panelists in the CAC, for leading us in this discussion. I believe this is solution-based work, and I believe it'll lead us to solutions. I have a few other updates, and then we can move on with our program. IOLERO has received some inquiries about the status of the ordinance. As many of you are aware, the Board of Supervisors voted to place IOLERO's ordinance on the November 3rd ballot. Many people have asked us what happens now, so I want to just provide you with a very brief update. For the November 3rd election, the County Registrar of Voters was required to send the ballots to be printed on August 27th, 2020. As a result, August 27th was the last possible day to make changes to the ballot or to voter information. There was no legal action taken to reverse the decision of the Board of Supervisors before August 27th. So at this point, the ordinance will appear on the November 3rd ballot, and it is very unlikely that that will change. However, there are several legal actions pending related to the ordinance. As many of you know, the sheriff on August 13th requested outside counsel to advise him regarding the legality of the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance, and his request was denied by the Board of Supervisors. There's a writ pending in the Superior Court to have the Superior Court review that decision. The Deputy Sheriff's Association, also known as the DSA, and the Sonoma County Law Enforcement Association, known as SCALIA, have made labor-related complaints with the Public Employees Retirement Board, known as PERB. That action is also simultaneously in process. To my knowledge, no dates have been set yet to hear that matter, but I was not able to confirm that information before this meeting today. I wanted to also let you know that I completed the audit of the David Ward Charles Blount case. I submitted it to the Sheriff's Office earlier this month. I made multiple policy recommendations to the Sheriff's Office based on my review of that case. And I'm meeting with the Sheriff's Office this Wednesday to discuss that audit, some other audits, and also IOLERO's annual report. IOLERO's annual report is scheduled for September 15th, and assuming there are no more delays caused by fires or other issues connected to COVID or otherwise, I expect it will move forward as scheduled. But if there are any changes, I will make an announcement via IOLERO's newsletter. And with that, that completes that report, and we can move forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Navarro. One thing I forgot before we move on, I did forget to ask for a motion to approve from our CAC, a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting. If there is anybody who can make a motion to approve those minutes.
I move to approve the minutes from last meeting. This is Dora.
Great. Thank you, Dora. Is there anybody who can second that motion?
This is Jose Landaverde. I can also second that motion.
Thank you, Jose. All of those CAC members present in favor of adopting the minutes, please raise your hands and say aye.
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 I see all hands up. Anybody who does not approve the minutes, please raise your hand and say nay. Hearing no answers, the minutes of last meeting are approved. Thank you. I'd like to turn now to the ad hoc committees and their reporting for this meeting, just to find out what our ad hoc groups have been up to. First, let's go to Dora Barrera for the de-escalation ad hoc committee. Dora?
Hi, everyone. So the de-escalation committee met last week, and a couple of updates. We did, these past couple of weeks, switch over really quick to research oversight ordinance, just because of the recommendations that we wanted to make to the board. So we are switching now back to de-escalation. We're trying to finish that work by the end of this month. And then we would like to then move forward with doing research on body-worn cameras. The Team SSU is helping with all that research, so they're also doing another table with summarizing some of those body-worn camera information about different counties and which counties use it, which counties post it, and other criteria that they do for sharing that body-worn camera. And I also wanted to mention a lot of our PAC members are emergency response workers and are working with all these different emergencies in various capacities, and just wanted to express how grateful I am for all the work that they're still doing, making time for these IHAL committees, and also to our Team SSU, because they are full-time students, so they're juggling other classes, but still making the time to attend our meetings and help us with the research. But that is all the update that I have for today.
Thank you very much, Dora. The next ad hoc report will be from Lorez Bailey. She is one of the members of our compliance techniques / use of force ad hoc committee. Lorez?
Thank you, Evan. To back up a little bit, our committee really started originally looking at the carotid hold. And we know that the state of California and the sheriff, we are now seeing probably a less use or no being banned the use of the carotid hold. But while we were doing that work too, we were looking at other areas of use of force and also looking at it across the California, right, to compare other departments and then try to give some information that is to departments that we feel that are in some ways not necessarily equivalent, but have a lot of the similarities in terms of demographics, urban versus suburban. Well, in the last month, we really did have to, our committee stepped away from that work to focus on the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance, but the interns kept the work going. And I just have to say, I'm just so appreciative of all the work that the interns did, because as we were having these discussions around the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance, Carlene in particular was asked a lot of questions and needed a lot of information. And just every day she was like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it was so great that the interns had done so much work because we really needed it. And I don't know if they hadn't been able, we were doing it as a committee, but they were able to come in and really push that work forward. And I don't know if the interns had been there, Carlene would have been able to have access to so much information and work. So I just want to say, even though our committee had to step away a little bit just to focus on the Evelyn Cheatham, that work still happened. And I'm just really appreciative of the interns, and it was very helpful. So as Dora said, we'll start to look at body-worn cameras, but we'll also continue our work around looking at use of force across the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorez. Okay, so now we're actually going to get into the main part of our meeting today, which is going to be something a little bit different than a typical CAC meeting. What I'm going to do now is turn the meeting over to our Vice Chair, Lorena Barrera, as well as a CAC member, Lorez Bailey. Both of them are going to be the facilitators for the next part of our meeting. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Lorena and Lorez.
Thank you, Evan. So
Thank you.
before we begin, I just wanted to read something that's kind of connects everything together. And it kind of piggybacks on what has been said by our director. Today's discussion is about creating a pathway to restorative justice. From conducting research about this concept, we have learned that restorative justice is a systemic response to addressing wrongdoing made to an individual by focusing on healing the wounds made to these individuals, offenders, and communities overall. Before we begin the conversation, we wanted to take the time to note that we are aware that many community members might be thinking, well, what does this meeting have to do with law enforcement? And why is the CAC holding this type of discussion? This isn't what the CAC should be working on. There are many incidents happening in our community right now, and the CAC should be working on addressing those first. If that's also something that crossed your mind when you first heard about this meeting, then we want to clear that up for you a little bit. We are aware that part of IOLERO's mission is to engage the community in order to be informed about the various viewpoints, concerns, and experiences of our community members. Helping to accomplish that small portion of the overall IOLERO mission is part of the assignment of the CAC. Without having discussions like the one we are having tonight, we are failing to do our part in helping strengthen the relationship between the Sheriff's Office and the community it serves. The CAC believes that it takes more than a few meetings and reports to make reform happen. Change does not happen overnight, and we can see that throughout all levels of government in this country and elsewhere. We need to understand the processes and policies that are out there, and we need to understand the issues while also conducting an analysis of what is being done elsewhere in order to provide proper recommendations that can be considered and possibly implemented. As you heard tonight, that is what we are working on in our ad hocs, and we will be continuing that work while also organizing meetings like this one, because we believe that is part of the process. With that being said, we'll move forward into the discussion. Lorez Bailey and I will be moderating this portion of the meeting. We will allow each panelist to speak for a few minutes about themselves, the work they are doing in the community, and how that work is tied to restorative justice. We will then ask panelists some questions on the topic of restorative justice and allow the panelists to respond if they wish to do so. At the end of the question portion for the panelists, we will open up time for public comment. Because we provided the opportunity for questions to be submitted prior to the meeting, we have informed the panelists that they are not required to respond to any of the public comments. However, if anyone from the public does have questions for the panelists, those questions can be emailed to IOLERO staff, or we can happily share the contact information of our panelists and give you the opportunity to contact them directly. Now, I'd like to introduce Veronica Cruz and Alegria de la Cruz. Veronica Cruz is a proud Latina of Mexican heritage and has lived in Sonoma County for 41 years. She is currently the Administrative Director of Restorative Resources. She previously worked for 32 years as a public servant in county government and retired as a business systems analyst for the Superior Court of California for the County of Sonoma. Alegria de la Cruz currently serves as the Interim Director of the County of Sonoma's new Office of Equity. Prior to her position as an interim director, she served as a chief deputy in the county council's office. She identifies as Chicana, a member of the population that makes up almost 40% of the state, yet as a lawyer, only 4% of the bar. She recognizes, embraces, and celebrates her responsibility to contribute meaningfully to public service, social justice, and equity, and is proud to be bilingual and bicultural. Now, Veronica and Alegria, if you would, we would love to have you explain what restorative justice is and what it seeks to accomplish. And then if you could also take about 5 minutes each to tell us about yourselves before Lorez proceeds with introducing our other 4 special panelists and the great work that they're doing in the community. So with that, Veronica or Alegria, who would like
I'm
to?
going to let Veronica lead on this. She's the resident restorative justice specialist. So take it away, Veronica.
Gracias, Alegría. I'll tell a little bit about myself because I think it's important that people know where I'm coming from. I was born in San Diego to a very large and community-oriented Mexican family in the heart of Barrio Logan. I was born in a Chevy, so I'm going to claim my Chicana roots. My sister and I were separated from our family in San Diego when we were preschool age, and then we were taken away from our mother when we were 6 or 7 and placed in foster care until we aged out of the system. And back then there wasn't any programs, there weren't any programs for young adults to go from foster care to the big world. So I was literally kicked out when the check wasn't coming into the foster family, and I quickly made mistakes. I ended up as a teenage mom and soon to become homeless with 2 toddlers. Their dad is African American, and we were SRJC students. And as a young family, we couldn't endure the struggles of trying to find jobs and housing and food. And it was obvious to us that our racism was alive and well in Sonoma County. I didn't want to stay in the situation, so I really worked hard to take care of my kids. I went back to school, and then I got my first real job with the Sonoma County government. Currently, I am the administrative director for Restorative Resources, but I come from the 32 years in the criminal justice system as a business system analyst, courtroom clerk. I hold a certificate in court management with the National Center for State Courts. I have a certificate in data analysis from Villanova University and other certificates. I was not able to get a degree because my main priority was making sure I was raising my kids so that they could go to college. So, Restorative Resources. A little bit about Restorative Resources. We are a nonprofit 501c organization that was founded in 2001. I believe it was incorporated in 2003 to bring the principles and practices of restorative justice to Sonoma County. Our mission is to provide resources to empower people to restore relationships and build communities of understanding and respect through the use of restorative justice and restorative practices. Restorative justice and the broader practices of restorative justice are practices which includes the use of restorative justice principles in schools and community. We invite all people affected by wrongdoing to participate in restorative circles where everyone has a voice in identifying harms and how to make things right. The circle conversations guided by the trained facilitator and are marked by respect, equality, and accountability. And at the core of restorative practices is a deeply held trust in the innate capacity of all people to discover growth in adversity, to extract wisdom from challenges, and to be thoughtful and just, and to authentically hear the perspectives of all. And currently we have 2 programs. We're much smaller than we used to be. Restorative Resources has downsized quite a bit. We had some huge grants from the BSCC, which I believe is the Board of State Community and Corrections. I might be saying that wrong. But we have 2 amazing programs called Restorative Conferencing, which is by Jane Wheel, our facilitator for that program. And we have the Accountability Circle, which is being led by Elizabeth Villaseñor Pesqueda and Manny Morales. With COVID, it's heavily affected our organization, but we still are maintaining those programs. And these 2 programs were recognized in 2016, commending Restorative Resource for their service to schools and youth with these 2 programs. And I have to get a shout out to some very respected facilitators and restorative workers, which would be Trey Vasquez, Beatriz Camacho, and Chad Bola, and I'm missing one person, Kareem Sanchez. These are these were some people who invested a lot of time and they were recognized by the board of supervisors for those programs. I'm not sure when I'm supposed to come in about restorative practices and restorative justice, so I will hand it off to Alegria at this moment.
Thank you, Veronica. So my name's Alegria, as Juarez introduced, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. I have a new adventure, as was mentioned, as the interim director for Sonoma County's first ever Office of Equity. And I'm supremely excited about the opportunity that that presents for our community to center voices that have been ignored and excluded from conversations about policy and practice and protocol in government. I'll start by saying a little bit about myself too. I come from a history of movement organizers. So starting with my grandma, who was one of the first women in the fields with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta in the early 60s. She ran the first ever United Farm Workers Union hiring hall out of her garage in part of the year in a little place in Parlier called La Colonia. So I am a proud farm worker kid. My dad grew up in the fields, also a farm worker. And he met my mom, who was an 18-year-old white woman who had escaped her middle-class existence in Long Beach, California, to organize farm workers. And these two people raised their 4 children. I'm the oldest of 4 in the middle of that movement. So from the time that I was a tiny tot, I grew up on a picket line, on strike, with a bullhorn, with a, poster board on my chest, asking people not to buy grapes, not to shop at the store. So I am from a community that really was empowered to change their existence and to bring attention and light and voice to a community that had long been excluded, long been ignored. And the reasons that the farm worker community had long been excluded and ignored, I think are really important to mention that that's about racism. So farm workers, like domestic workers, like other low-wage workers of color, have long been excluded from federal labor law protections. Again, the reasons for that exclusion from those protections are about race. People who worked in the fields in our history in the United States were slaves. They were people who were enslaved. They weren't slaves, that's not their identity. They were people who were brought against their will by force across the world to be forced to work and to be forced to be somebody else's property. And so that's the deep history of land and agriculture in our country. And I am so proud to be standing on the shoulders of many, many generations of people who fought to upend that understanding and to really make clear the devastating impacts of not having faced head on our history of Americans and our relationship with land and with agriculture. Let's see, I went to law school. I was the first class after Proposition 209 had basically completely and totally devastated the University of California's public educational system for people of color. My class at the flagship public institution for the state of California, UC Berkeley, had 4 African-American women, 1 African-American man, and 12 Latinos. This is out of a class of 300 in the state of California. So these issues of race and equity continued to be something that I dedicated my time and energy to, organizing through law school, recognizing that the education that we were being taught was not going to prepare us to truly fight and to truly be able to learn the tools to challenge these decisions and to challenge these unjust laws that were directed at excluding people of color from public institutions of higher education. So I spent 3 wonderful years in law school organizing and writing amicus briefs, only every now and then going to class because frankly, my education was mine. And we needed to create a system of learning and curriculum that truly reflected the needs that we had as political people of color to learn the tools that we needed to make changes in the law and the way that we were practicing law. After I graduated from law school, I went to work at California Rural Legal Assistance, where I proudly represented my farm worker community in the Central Valley. I ran a program that was dedicated to the rights of Indigenous language speaking farm workers, who are among the most vulnerable and the most ignored and misunderstood in California fields. After that, I continued my advocacy on behalf of low-income communities of color by working at the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, where I litigated high-level impact litigation cases on behalf of those same communities, looking at environmental injustice and the ways in which environmental tools could really go to empower and center the voices of those people most impacted by decisions made by government. So before I came to work in government, my job was to hold government accountable by suing them. So I bring a very interesting perspective to being a public servant and being in government. And at the County of Sonoma, I've been really just completely in love with the work that I do. I represented for a long time the Community Development Commission, working on kind of transactional work, so moving away from litigation into advisory work, into making sure that government had a perspective about how to truly serve low-income communities of color, people who spoke different languages, and how to do that responsibly and well with public resources. During the fires, I served as the county's Spanish language public information officer, and made sure that we were sharing life-saving information with people during the single largest urban wildfire event in the history of our country. So I feel like I have a really good perspective from different sides of the aisle. And after having been a litigator and moved into transactional work, recognizing the ways in which different tools and different skill sets and different ways of resolving challenges can be meaningful, and how critical it is for us to center the needs of the people who are most vulnerable, who are also most impacted in any decision-making process that we engage in. I have a working definition of equity that I love. It's both about a process and an outcome. So you can't have an outcome that results in making sure that you don't see the differences in people's health and their wealth and their well-being in a community. We definitely see those differences right now, and those differences are most stark when it comes to race. And so in order to really change the outcomes that our community is experiencing, specifically those outcomes of our communities of color, we need to have different processes that we put into place. Again, where we're centering the experiences and the needs of the people most impacted by the decisions that government is making. So I am very honored, and I'm really excited to listen tonight as your interim director of the new Office of Equity, to make sure that as we start to define the important priorities of this office, that we engage in meaningful partnerships with the amazing people on the CAC, the great work of IOLERO, and to really continue to elevate the voices of folks who need to be heard and need to be seen in a different time. This is the time now in our country. I think we have seen and felt so deeply the pain, the frustration, the really sad reality over and over again, and the frustration with having to see those same kinds of videos over and over again that result in violence and death against people of color, against Black men, against Black women, at the hands of our law enforcement agencies. And so I am so grateful for the invitation to be here tonight to listen, and to make sure that I elevate the voices that we hear tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alegria and Veronica. Veronica, I think now would be the perfect time for you to just explain restorative justice to everyone and what it seeks to accomplish, and then we will have Lorez introduce our other panelists.
Coming from a criminal justice background and becoming a subject matter expert in that process, I had many, many questions around restorative justice and what are restorative justice practices, approaches, and techniques. And I was swimming in all these terms, and I really needed to define it for myself. So I'm going to use some really simple, hopefully everyday language so that we can, people can understand it like I understand it. And I wouldn't call myself an expert. I've been in this realm for 2.5 years. And most of my years have been in the criminal justice system. So, so what is restorative justice, and what are these practices, approaches, and techniques? I started with this definition, which is part of the Restorative Resources mission statement. Restorative justice is a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense, and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. I also found this definition: restorative justice encourage outcomes that promote responsibility, reparation, compensation, amends, and healing for all. And at a very minimum, restorative justice is an invitation for dialogue and exploration. So what are some key principles and actions of restorative resources? And one thing that you're going to hear over and over again are these 3 pillars of restorative justice: harms and needs, obligations, and engagement. So first and foremost, restorative justice focuses on the harms and needs of those harmed, the harm of the community, and those that cause the harm. Restorative justice believes that crime is fundamentally a violation of people and interpersonal relationships. Who has been harmed and what are their needs? Victims, also called impacted parties, those that have been harmed, need to be able to grieve their losses, to be able to tell their stories, to have their questions answered, and to have their harms and needs caused by the offense addressed. Victims should be able to self-identify their own needs, receive information about the incident, the why me, how did this happen, tell the story of what happened and how they were affected when there's space where it can be publicly named and acknowledged, where they can directly tell the ones who caused the harm the impact of their actions. They can be empowered to take back control of their lives. Restorative justice addresses the offender's obligations that resulted from the harms to the impacted parties and the community, seeking full, direct, and appropriate accountability and responsibility in addressing their needs and repairing the harm. Whose obligation are these? What are the causes? For offenders, also the ones who, there's differences on terminology as well, but I'm trying to include all the ones that I've heard. Ones who have caused harm. Real accountability is to face up to what one has done. Restorative justice inspires empathy and encourages them to understand and take responsibility for their actions, their own actions and choices, directly to the ones they had harmed. Offenders are also encouraged to experience their own personal transformation where they can accept their responsibility and take steps to repair the harm and rebuild relationships to the extent possible. Restorative justice uses inclusive and collaborative processes that invite full participation and consensus. It involves those with a legitimate stake in the situation to heal what has been broken. Who has a stake in this situation? The key stakeholders are the victims, also known as the impacted parties, the offenders, the one causing the harm, and the relevant community members. Restorative justice focuses more on the needs than punishments by creating mutual agreements over imposed consequences as the criminal justice system does. Restorative justice strives in a collaborative way to strengthen relationships and the welfare of community to prevent future harms. What is the appropriate process to involve stakeholders in an effort to put things right? Around these principles are core values that hold it together like a rim of a wheel, and that's an example I extracted from the little book of resources, Restorative Justice by Howard Zier. There's a particular emphasis on respect. Some say that restorative justice is respect, and that is the highest value in the restorative realm. Respect reminds us of our interconnectedness as well as our differences. It insists that we balance concern for all parties while respecting the individuality and worth of each person. If we pursue justice as respect, treating all equally, we will do justice restoratively. If we do not respect others, we will not do justice restoratively, no matter how earnest we adopt the restorative principles. Two other important values are responsibility and relationships, and I have a certain limited time. How can we tell if something's restorative? I hear this a lot. Well, that's restorative, that's not restorative. And there's 5 questions you can ask. The first one being, are the wrongs being acknowledged? The second question is, are the needs of those harmed being addressed? The third is, the one who caused the harm being encouraged to understand the damage and accept their obligation to make right the wrong? Are those involved in or affected by this being invited to be a part of the solution? Is there concern being shown for everyone involved? If there's even one no to any of these questions, even though a program project process may have restorative elements, it isn't restorative justice. Many times restorative is used interchangeably with proactive and supportive processes like learning interpersonal skills, mediation skills, conflict resolution, communication techniques, which all place a high value on building and maintaining positive relationships. They may share, be consistent with, and supportive of the same values and skills as restorative justice. Restorative practices, approaches, and techniques are catch-all phrases like big umbrella, and restorative justice is a term that refers only to the process to address harm in the community. What I simply put it as, because I had to understand it for myself, is I'd say that restorative justice is a process that addresses harm one incident at a time to get the end result of justice, and restorative practices, approaches, and techniques are tools that we use to get there. Again, recurring themes are harms and needs, obligations, and engagement. So for restorative justice, I feel the focus is on the incident that caused the harm, repairing and rebuilding relationships, and restorative practices, approaches, and techniques focuses on building and maintaining positive relationships before, during, after, and helping people build, those positive relationships. And I think I'll stop there. I have more to go, but we're limited.
Yeah, I just want to, if I could just interject for just 1 minute. Lorez is going to move on to introduce our other panelists. I just want to let everybody know this meeting was scheduled to go till 7:30. It's okay for us to go later than that because I want to make sure that our other panelists have a lot of time to discuss the issues and questions presented by Veronica and the questions that our moderators have for them. So Lorez, please introduce, let's move on to our other panelists and let's make sure that we have a lot of time to talk with them about their thoughts about these very important issues.
Thank you, Carlene. So first I'm going to start with Kimmy, and Kimmy, you're kind of the inspiration for this, conversation that we're having tonight. Kimmy Barbesa, let me get it back up because Kimmy likes her name to be said correctly, and out of respect, we really need to make sure we do say people's names correctly. So Kimmy Barbosa Soweto is a Brazilian woman and formerly incarcerated youth. She earned her master's in public policy from Mills College and is a longtime community activist for racial justice, equity, immigrant rights, and criminal justice reform. Kimmy is passionate about promoting community health by integrating plant medicine, sustainability, land stewardship, and social justice. Welcome, Kimmy. Angel Washington is a long-time off-and-on Sonoma County resident. She's a single mother of a very popular local 5-year-old activist. Ms. Washington has had a long, hard life filled with a lack of direction. She has experienced a lot of hardships, racism, and police brutality. Thank you for joining us tonight. Libby Cuffey is a transgender, non-conforming, non-binary resident of Sonoma County. Hailing from Morgan Hill, Libby pursued an education in music at Sonoma State University and then proceeded to play professionally with a plethora of groups in Sonoma County. More recently, Libby has been involved in protest, community organizing, and activism. Delashay Carmona Benson is an Afro-Latina speaker, activist, and mother and full-time student. She is the co-president of the Black Student Union, vice president of Uplifting Black Leaders, and president of Advocacy, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, AID. And she is the head of committees evaluating the District Attorney's Office and Child Protective Services. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I think the way we're gonna start is, Kimmy, I'll start with you and I'll just do it in the order of introductions. If you could tell a little bit more about yourself, but also the work that you've been doing in the community and why you really felt like this conversation around restorative practice and justice was important for the CAC to be having.
Hi, yes. So my name is Kimberly Barbosa Suero. I don't want to take too much time talking about myself because we do have limited time and I want to get to the fundamental conversation. I do feel like this is an important conversation, but I really feel that reparations needs to come before restorative justice anyways. You know, the question that Veronica brought up was, you know, the harms reduction and everything else that comes with restorative justice. But really, what do we do when this community is being repeatedly harmed by an agency that normalizes harm, and with a system that normalizes harm? What if the system is the offender? Department of Corrections and law enforcement is notorious for using force, and jails are systemically notorious for physical and sexual abuse and assault. This does not allow for healing and rehabilitation. And I really think that the only way to pursue restorative justice with these principles in mind is to dismantle a system that is not made to be restorative and replace it with something that is. I bring up the idea of restorative justice because hearing everyone calling into the Board of Supervisors is very clear that our voices have not been heard, and there's a lot of pain in that. And so that's why I thought this conversation was important. But I want to be very clear that reparations is needed first. I am an advocate and activist in this community for almost 10 years around immigrant rights, police oversight, criminal justice reform, racial justice, equity, poverty alleviation. And currently I'm working on bringing awareness to the human rights violations in this community. There's been 2 reports released and one very recently, just a couple months ago, by the Human Rights Commission that has been largely ignored by our local officials. And it highlights abuses and use of force by the police here. And if we continue to ignore these things, how is that restorative as well? So I'm going to cut my time short so the other panelists can introduce themselves and we can actually get to talking about the subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Angel?
Hi, sorry, I'm not turning on my camera today. My name is Angel. I also don't want to take up too much time. Please don't say my name wrong. If you can't say it, please call me Jelly. I'm originally from Louisiana. I was birthed by a 12-year-old mother and a gangbanging father. And then my mother had my little sister who's a year younger than me, and we moved to California. From there, my dad got into all these fights and we dealt with the police all the time. So, I mean, even as a kid, the police knew my name, you know, because my dad would get pulled over and I'd be in the car and we'd have to deal with the police. I mean, being a kid and having our pockets checked and, you know, getting out the seat and having them to check around us, that's where the start of it was. I then grew up with my father, you know, going in and out of my life. My mother kicked me out when I was 12 because she had me when she was 12. And from there, I mean, it just went downhill. I was a 12-year-old roaming the streets trying to figure out how to take care of myself, trying to figure out where my next day's meal was gonna come from. Where was I gonna wash my butt? How was I gonna feed myself, you know? And from there, it just went downhill and I ended up getting in trouble. I too have been in the corrections department, but not the same side as you guys. Sorry. Meetings usually go one of 2 ways for me. I get nervous or I get really pissed off. So we're gonna
take a moment. Take a moment. Take a deep breath. You're doing fine.
Thank you. But for me, I don't understand. I'd like to say that the word restorative justice for me does not work because restorative means to refill, and I don't feel that there was ever any justice in the system at all. I don't see these police being rehabilitated or even trying to make any type of attempt to reconcile the community or the people that they've hurt. But with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and move it along so that way we can start this meeting. because there are still a few people to introduce and we're running behind already. So thanks.
Thank you. Libby?
Hi, I'm also going to keep my stuff very short because there's a more important discussion to be had. I have not personally dealt with a lot of police violence, but a lot of my friends have, and I have to say that it's really abhorrent how this is all being handled. I don't really think that we can talk about restorative justice until we actually talk about what can be said reparations. There are demands that have to be met, and the people have not been heard. Another thing that really bugs me, frankly, is that I'm one of the only trans people that's on this panel, if not the only trans person that's on this panel. And I see that so often within, there's just a lack of representation in general for us. And I want to point out that out of a lot of the people that are denigrated in the society in America in general, that Black trans women are given the most flack and given the most abuses. And it's really frustrating to see a lack of knowledge surrounding trans people within public officials. It's really disheartening to know that there's no representation for us, and we can't really rely on a bunch of cis people to do what we ask because you don't share our experiences. And I would like to keep that in mind as we move forward in this meeting, that we have to be mindful of those who aren't in this room. And also, I'm not a monolith for all trans people. I'm not a monolith for all gender nonconforming people. Our experiences are vast and different, and that has to be understood as well. I'm going to move on to hearing Delashay speak.
Thank you. Delashay?
Hello, as everyone see, I'm Delashay, and I want to really thank everyone for inviting me and even having this panel today. This is a panel that was long overdue, long overdue. I think you've already heard most of the introduction about myself, and I wear a lot of hats. You can add VP of Finance on student government at SRJC now. I just got that title as well. I'm very active in the community, very active. I'm not gonna talk about myself. We'll be here longer than you guys want to be. My theory in justice when it comes to restorative justice is that it emphasizes on repairing harm that's caused by criminal behavior. And in this subject, and in this case, the criminal behavior is coming from people that are supposed to be there to protect and serve us. And we're talking the police, or we're talking about CPS with social workers, or we're even talking about officials in school. And it's hard, it just breaks my heart that we even have to have this conversation. But to me, I feel like it's gonna take 3 parts. And we're gonna have to repair this, because crime causes harm. And justice requires repairing that harm. And that harm has to be repaired. And then you wonder, well, how are we gonna repair it? And I think it comes with encounter. We have to start with dialogue, both parties. Because if the people that are mostly affected by this harm are not included in this process, then this is just a waste of time. Because unless you've been through it, you cannot put a plan together. No one, I'm looking around, of course, Jelly doesn't have her picture on, but very few people on this panel or even on my screen and my computer even knows what it is to be BIPOC. So you guys cannot sit here and write something and write our stories. We're tired of people writing our stories. We know how to speak. See, I know how to speak. And I think that for the people that are most affected by this, they need to precipitate in order for there to be a resolution. And then we come into the transformation part of this, where all these changes are going to be caused and relationships changes and the community changes. And you have to think about it as law enforcement is here to maintain order, all right? But the community, we should be building peace. And that's the problem. And we're colliding with each other. And so it needs to be an inclusion of all parties, everyone involved, all sides coming together, making amends of this harm, And there have to be like a reform. We have to defund the police, refund the people. I say that all the time because in order for there to be changes, there's got to be a cost. And that's why even Aliero is needing the 1% budget from the police to get this going. I mean, you think about it, 1%. We think about the board of supervisors that is getting 244 million from PG&E, and we're asking for 24 million to go to homelessness. Even that's an issue. Whatever we do, if it's not funded, we're not going to see the restorative changes. We need the changes.
Delashay, you started this in your conversation, and I'm sure Kimmy and also I think someone else had hit a point, maybe Veronica. So let's just think about, like, what if we really wanted to start a restorative justice practice process? What do you think would be some of just the best approach to initiating even this process? Delashay, you talked about inclusion, parties coming together, making amends. Does anyone else have anything that, you know, they think that is the best approach to even initiating this process? Some could say tonight maybe even be the beginning of that, but maybe you can raise hands and I can see you and I can call on you to see if anybody wants to respond to that. Like, what is the best way we could start even trying to have a process like this? Delashay?
Well, first, I think the first thing is the offenders, whoever they are, via police, via CPS, via teachers, via the SRJC, whoever, they need to take responsibility for their actions. You know, they're never held responsible for their actions. It seems like these offenders can do whatever, and they need to take responsibility for the harm they've caused. Stop redressing victims. I'd say that's the first.
So looking at that,
if you go to an AA meeting, you have to admit that you're an alcoholic. Well, admit that you're a racist. Period.
Veronica and then Kimmy.
I'm gonna dovetail on, sorry, I don't know if it's Delashay's comments, is that there has to be accountability from the offender, from the people that are doing the harm before you can get to the other pieces and the transformation. If you don't have the accountability, you can't get to the other steps. You can't get to where you need to be. You can't get to the justice piece. But I also feel that you've got to bring and invite all the stakeholders to the conversation. And everyone has to be at that table that have a stake in creating a solution.
Kimmy?
I want to first, before I speak, acknowledge that Angel also has her hand up. It's just her camera's off, so she's raising her hand the way we were told to via the Zoom. So I think that the pathway of trust comes from the acknowledgement of the history and presence of this country. First of all, law enforcement of the present is the descendant of slave patrols, and mass incarceration is the new plantation. Let's be clear on that. Slavery is still legal under the 13th Amendment in the form of prison labor, and ICE, so, you know, our immigration police is terrorizing and detaining families due to their immigration status. And that's currently happening in our county, even during a global pandemic and local fire evacuations. The idea that law enforcement can be agents of social change is appalling. I know that there's a question here about individual-based policing or community-based policing, but I think that at best, it's definitely not trauma-informed when you're approaching an over-police community. If there is a more mindful way of policing, they should have been doing it already, or at the very least, years ago when Sonoma County Sheriff killed 15-year-old Jeremiah Chass or 13-year-old Andy Lopez. Much like when we talk about passing anti-racist legislation, it does not change the minds of people in power who hold certain viewpoints. So systems that are built this way will not change just because you tell them they can no longer be racist or target our communities. I mean, case in point, look how hard Sheriff Essex is fighting against giving Iolero office the resources it needs to effectively review police use of force. This is the same sheriff who, during a budget hearing, said that running a jail is like running a hotel with the vacancy sign always on. Scholars call this the prison industrial complex for a reason. We also have police in our schools, which coincide with another phenomenon called the school to prison pipeline. These forms of repression are ingrained in policing because policing was born of oppression. If you think that law enforcement can be change agents, or that we can even just take our steps towards restorative justice now without even thinking about the idea of accountability may not even work, especially when business means keeping beds filled. So if we don't look at these issues, the pathway to restorative justice, quite frankly, will be paved with our blood. Thank you.
Thank you. Angel?
Hi, I'd like to piggyback off of what Kimmy said as agreeance that the police were originally formed to keep slaves intact and make sure that they don't run away and to punish the ones that do. We are still running off of a slave system. I do often feel enslaved, and it's a scary thing to think of. And I honestly think that a pathway would be to go into the academy and look at all those people. We need to start evaluating their records and their wrongdoings in the community, not just acknowledging them, but doing something about them. Those bad apples have to be taken out before they spoil the bunch. That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Veronica, I think you had something you wanted to.
Excuse me. I agree with what Angel said about going into the police academy. I feel like we need to really start where we recruit candidates, and we need to look at them and to see, you know, are there issues there? They're going to be having huge responsibility, and to use the penal code in itself, it doesn't describe police officers, it says peace officers. So I always felt when I looked at a code, if it says peace officer, you're to create peace. You're to make sure there's peace in the community. And I have a stake in this situation as well. I have Black children, I have Black grandchildren. These are my kids, and I feel that I have to teach them to care about surviving the encounter. And seriously, I think about their danger, not just being on the streets, but having contact with law enforcement. It's a reality in our family, in my family. But I really agree with as possible way to change the mindsets is to teach them in the academy. And I also heard from a leader of law enforcement that they were taught, this group of officers that are out there, that to be warriors. Well, their job is to be peace officers, and those are like two ends of the spectrum to me. So maybe we need to reevaluate the academy and the curriculum and the recruiting process and all the psychological evaluations that happen when you start running potential candidates through the academy to see if they're suitable before they become an officer with a badge and a gun.
I want to give Libby a chance to lean. Sorry, Lorena, just give Libby a chance because I didn't see that hand up, and then I'll hand off to Lorena. So Libby, I want to give you a chance to lean in on the conversation, then Lorena will follow up with another question.
I mean, I keep hearing us talk about restorative justice and what pathways we can take, but really what has to happen is that law enforcement has to acknowledge what they've done. And honestly, I would say just drop all your badges, because the job is based in slavery in the first place. Like, frankly, if we're trying to continue, there's no actual good reforms we can make to a system that's already abusive in and of itself. This is akin to a house that we're trying to paint over, essentially. Like, there's a bunch of cracks, there's leaking pipes everywhere, and we're trying to put band-aids over this when the foundation is rotten. And the people who experience that kind of stuff most are in the basement, and that's mostly the panelists who are here today. So I don't know why we're talking about how to keep law enforcement involved when we should really be focusing more on community care and how we can take care of each other and how we can give ourselves the resources. How can we give resources back to people to take care of ourselves versus putting our safety in the hands of people who are heavily armed, who are known protecting white supremacists and have all the stakes to keep maintaining order. I don't know why we're still talking about having law enforcement involved at all when we should be taking care of ourselves, and we can take care of ourselves.
Thank you, Libby. Delashay, did you have something else that you wanted to add before we move on? And then Kimmy, you can.
I think also that there needs to be a time frame, because there seems to be a lot of lip action. We're doing these protests. There's been a time where UBL reached out and talked to the sheriff, And I seen that the NAACP reached out with the mayors and whatnot, but seems like a bunch of words with empty causes because we want actions. So there needs to be a time frame that these offenders are willing to give us. And also, I think that with some more mediation, one of the things that I did was reaching out to the DA's office and putting together a committee that would work directly with the DA with our problems, because it does start with dialogue. Changes do start with dialogue. So I definitely agree with dialogue. The same thing happened with CPS where I reached out to Nick Honey, who is the director, and we've been having, I would say, some pretty good progress there going. But it can't just be dialogue. There's got to be action. And of course, coming back to the financial support, there has to be changes. Well, there has to be some financial support that's going to support these changes. Most of all, we need to raise awareness in the community via news media, social media. You know, I think the community needs to be more aware because there's a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles that we have to face. And we're always, you know, people always depend on the police. You know, I lose my cat, we call the police. You know, we depend on the police for everything. And so it's gonna be hard for a lot of people to realize that we don't need that much police. When I first moved to California, I lived in Hidden Valley Lake. It was a gated community. We had our own security. I seen the police there, maybe, I was there 5-6 years. I seen them maybe 4 or 5 times. I was amazed. I thought we didn't even have police. Private security did it all. It wasn't a problem. And they're paid probably 1/10 of what we're paying the police. I don't think I should have to call the police if I lose my dog. Also, it has to be a victim-centered approach to resolve these issues. Because we can't think about the police, you gotta think about these victims that have been victimized for years and years and years. So our voice has to be part of that process. I cannot say that enough. You have to bring us to the table. We have to speak about on ourselves. But the problem with that is that most of the people who are BIPOC are not with talking to the police or talking to changes. Why? Because we've been re-victimized over and over and over. And so we feel disempowered. And a lot of people didn't even realize how much they disempowered us. And some of us, and at SRJC, for example, the professors are reading the book, The White Fragility. How many of them have emailed me saying, wow, I have said some racist things. I think half of the time people don't even know them. I've heard some racist things on this panel already. People don't even realize what comes out of their mouths. So it has to be, again, I can't stress how much, if you want restorative justice, the people, BIPOC people, need to be at the table.
Kimmy, did you have something else that you want to add?
Yes, I want to piggyback off what Delashay was saying. Like, a dialogue is absolutely important. And that means a dialogue talking about racism, talking about injustices too, because that's what people have been very quiet about. I mean, how many of you here have read the Human Rights Commission report that came out a couple months ago? You know, I see Alegría. Who else? There's not a lot. Okay, Veronica. There's not, but how many of our public officials have even made that an agendized item for City Council, for Board of Supervisors meeting? That's pretty big deal. If someone put out a report about my community saying that there's been human rights violations, that would be the first thing I want to talk about with my community, and yet there hasn't been a dialogue. Anytime something happens with the sheriff's office, maybe there's a recommendation for something like better mental health treatment. We have record that has been denied, that has been refused to have even more a training on things like mental health and how do you address somebody with maybe who's not neurotypical. Because let's not forget that, you know, disabilities, not all of them are visible. And even one of our community members who was killed by an officer, David Ward, had a disability and was not treated properly as well. It's really important also to have representation in general. Most of our city council across this county is white. Our board of supervisors, all white and affluent. There are decision makers who do not represent the people that they are serving, will not make decisions that are in the best interest of us. We have this global pandemic that's putting a lot of us at risk for evictions right now. And they have been dragging their feet. We have community members who are getting deported during global pandemic and people aren't doing anything about it. We have farm workers who are harvesting grapes for people's wine, who are working through a pandemic without hazard pay, without paid sick leave, who are also working via smoke inhalation. So the next glass of Sonoma County 2020 wine, know that it came due to smoke inhalation and due to a pandemic. I do want to point out a couple of things since we want to do dialogue, right? That there's also the problem of rewarding over-policing, and rewarding bad behavior. That the district attorney, the local police departments, the sheriff's office, and our local decision makers seem to be complacent with misconduct. Like I said, the fact that yet another report on human rights violations has been published and no one's talking about it, that's a problem. That's the second one released in, I think, the last 10 or 20 years. We watched as Sheriff's Deputy Gail House was promoted after killing 13-year-old Andy Lopez. We have seen the sheriff denied that they need better training for addressing mental health crises, even after they murdered 15-year-old Jeremiah Chass. And 2 weeks ago, this happened again, that someone was killed, tasered to death by the sheriff's office while having a mental health crisis. There needs to be training, and the fact that people are refusing that's a problem. We've seen Deputy Charles Blount retain his job despite numerous use of force complaints, which we have video evidence of, including when he killed resident David Ward, who was a disabled man sitting in his car. We have witnessed the district attorney refuse to file charges against Deputy Thorne when he used his taser on a man who was laying in bed and then proceeded to beat the man with his baton and use this baton to choke the man who was on his stomach. We have seen the district attorney, Jill Ravitch, clear officers of wrongdoing when they murdered Branch Roth during what was supposed to be a mental health wellness check. I have a list of 94 names that we know of residents who have been killed by law enforcement, even as recent as the 2 weeks ago, like I had mentioned. This is not even including the names of people who were tortured in Sonoma County Jail under the guise of yard counseling. The sheriff's office has paid out $9.5 million in litigation fees alone for these reasons. But apparently we can't even have this conversation. Where's the dialogue for this? The county just continues and the cities continue to sweep it under the rug. How can we heal if we ignore injustices? And if dialogue is what we're talking, if dialogue is the first step, then this needs to be talked about. We can't ignore this any longer. Clearly, mental health is one of the biggest issues here in this county. We are depressed, especially during the pandemic, rates of suicide go up. And if our people having mental health crises like Jeremiah Chass are being murdered, I mean, I don't need to say much more than that. Thank you.
So a lot of things have been said, and one of the things that was brought up was that, we need to bring all of the parties involved into the process and bring all stakeholders to the table. And a lot of the things that you just said, Kimmy, sounds like the community could interpret them as a lack of acknowledgement, or maybe law enforcement not recognizing, what they're accountable for. So if restorative justice, in order to achieve it, requires participation from all parties, and it sounds like, there is some unwillingness for a particular party to participate, what would you all recommend to begin the process if we have a party that isn't participating in, acquiring restorative justice? Okay, we'll start with, I'm going to go in the order that I'm seeing the hands up. So Libby, we'll go with you first.
The problem I have with this question is that it's implying that someone doesn't want to come to the table. And in this scenario, it feels like law enforcement, especially Sheriff Essick, doesn't want to come to this table because he's fighting tooth and nail to make sure that everything goes according to his plan. He's trying to, I know he was making attempts to make sure the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance wouldn't get on the ballot because he doesn't want effective oversight. He doesn't want to be held accountable. I don't think we can even, like, that the response to that is really just, take away his badge. That's like, if he's not willing to even have a conversation about how he can be held accountable, or his officers can be held accountable, we can't even begin to move forward. So the very first thing that has to happen is that The sheriff has to acknowledge what's happened, and he's got to hold himself accountable, hold his officers accountable, and honestly, quit his job. There are much better ways that people can contribute to the community. If they don't want to be a part of this table, then they don't have a place in saying anything about how they can effectively protect us, because as it stands, we are not being protected and served as these people. The law enforcement is existing to protect and serve rich people and their property. I've seen multiple pictures of protests where law enforcement is specifically guarding, like they're guarding Trump supporters, and they're just trying to police Black Lives Matter supporters. So I see this happen in Sonoma County too. Every time we ask for law enforcement for help in protests, basically don't do anything. People have been hit with cars. There's been attempted vehicular slaughter, and nothing's happened about it. We've been doing the research. We have been clamoring. We have been basically shouting at everyone to understand that the sheriff and law enforcement doesn't want to come to the table unless it comes at their own terms. They only have their own interest in mind. So we don't need them if they're not going to actually be a part of this. I understand that Brandon Cutting is here, and I don't personally know you, but I still think the best thing you can do is drop your badge and do something else for the community. And you can disagree with that, but I know you're wrong.
Thank you. We'll go with Delashay, then Angel, and then Kimmy.
The point that I want to make also too is that restorative justice, it's a real fine line. It can be unevenly applied, and it could be benefiting solely and only certain racial, ethnic people economically and not others. So there has to be an oversight on it as well. Because we need to minimize the likelihood of some biased results. So we have to stick true to its values, and those values need to be clearly understood. Like society needs to clearly understand, and then it has to be frequently articulated to guard against, strain from the practice. But we should build on our assets, like external and internal. There's a lot of public frustration right now, a lot of it, via police, via CPS, via schools, via everywhere. And it's also included with the environment that we're going through. We're dealing with fires, we're dealing with COVID. It's just a mess of frustration going on. And so we also have to look at the success. And I often have to sit back and look at that, because in the last few months, there has been a lot of success. I can talk about SRJC and say that we now have Black scholarships. We have professors that are coming together, building a Black ethnic department. So there is success in this as well. And we have to look at both sides. And you have to just decide on those basic strategies, like on focus on groups and get the community involved. The community, your votes count. And so we need to start on a local level, which is true, and definitely involve the affected people. But we also have to go regional, go national, and look for leadership there. I know that we reached out to the CAC program, and hopefully the police will back that up to help us have a better bridge with the police with that. Those who don't know, that's from Oregon, look it up. Hopefully it's coming to our county soon. And that's kind of like what you have to do. You have to start with a pilot program with dialogue and seeing some changes, like the CAC program, like SRJC, who's coming together and doing all these different changes. Because what happens is that before and historically, we were always left out of the process. People would come together and write what they want to write about us without including us. And so we were always left out of the criminal justice process. So we definitely have to be part of this in order for this to work. We have a disproportionate homelessness. We're facing unemployment, criminal injustices, and a lower academic performance, higher health risk with the COVID. This is stuff that my people are facing all the time. Top that up with CPS is going to take our kids away. Top that up with us not even to be able to live like anyone else. We can't walk to the store. We can't go for a jog. We can't even breathe now. We can't even turn our backs to you now because we're going to get shot. Like, it's too much. And people say, well, you know, why should we invest in this? That wasn't us. You know, you always talk about things that happened 400 years ago. It's not 400 years. Well, let me tell you what, if we were trying to right from the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation. That is true. But by suppressing my people, you guys have gained wealth. And so I'm sorry, with that wealth, you have inherited our debt. So reparations is definitely owed to my people. You owe us. And so I think the best thing and the first move is the comprehensive racial awareness mandatory for anybody who's in office, all of you guys on this panel, the board of supervisors, Susan Gordon, all of y'all need comprehensive racial awareness. SRJC, comprehensive race, mandatory, students, mandatory. School, K-12, mandatory. That's gonna make a big change. We have to start somewhere. So I think that, and it builds accountability. It promotes social emotional growth, and it supports positive behavior, especially like in schools. And you can't just train them for one day, train and hope that everything changes. No, this has to have follow-ups. We have to have coaching, some demonstrations. This has to be ongoing training, evolve with everyone. But just having this panel and no actions, I don't know about everybody else on this panel, but words, talking, panel, I'm getting tired of it. It's time for actions. Actions. Find the money. Go to the police. Defund the police. Refund the people.
Thank you, Delashay. Angel, and then Kimmy.
Okay, so I don't like the use of both sides because yet again it sounds like we're back to segregation. We're being segregated. Why do we have to categorize ourselves from them if we're all one community? But I know that myself and my community, fellow community members continue to show up. So we're obviously ready to talk and cannot act in place or speak for the selfish, money-hungry authority figures in this county. If both sides don't want to talk, then obviously we have a major issue. For one, this shouldn't be an option. If you're a part of this community, you need to act as if you're a part of this community. Your community pays your check. You know what I'm saying? If you can't do your job, then you need to sit down and pass it to someone who can. If you don't want to talk, then you're not ready for the position that you're in. And I mean, it's not like we're asking for anything. We're not asking him to get up and paint rainbows in the sky. We're asking him to be treated as human beings, let alone to have a conversation with someone who holds power to make the community. Hell, even take away our freedom. If they don't want to talk, then they are obviously in the wrong position and they need to be replaced and give the job to someone who cares about their community and the community members and the continued growth of the community. Because right now we're going down and we're sinking further and further, and the people with authority are sitting back smiling, probably smoking expensive Cuban cigars while the homeless people are out in the cold. You know what I'm saying? I don't see how you can get in a position where you have the authority and the control over everyone. Myself, I consider myself a leader, a role model, an activist. I'm not going to lead my people and then say, okay, you guys are on your own, or turn myself against them and say it's me versus them. No, I'm the leader of the community when I do community actions. So therefore, I need to uphold myself and act as a leader and consider all the community members and think of how to make everyone feel safe and welcome, because that's the part of my job as a leader, right? That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Kimmy?
I wanted to thank Jelly for that. It's very true that when you are in a position of power and leadership that you have to set an example, and we see quite the opposite of that. Instead of intervening when you see something wrong happening, Instead, there is like a code of silence, and then that's rewarded later. So thank you for that. And the original question, I think, in this whole this segment of the conversation was like, what are the first steps and what do you do if someone doesn't want to come to the table? Well, the first steps is talking about it. I really want to see the Board of Supervisors. I really want to see every city council member, council meeting to put the Human Rights Commission report on their agenda. And let's actually take a look about what's happening in our community, because there's some things in there that's outlining some very severe patterns, very concerning patterns. And if we don't look at that, they've done the work for us already. Like the patterns are very clear once you read that report. We need to talk about that. And if someone's unwilling to come to the table, and like Angel said, what is this dichotomy about? You know, who is this, the two sides? Are we talking about police versus civilians? Are we talking about racists versus anti-racists? Are we talking about white people versus people of color? What is this dichotomy? It just seems so ambiguous to me. Regardless of what side you're on, you know, those who want human rights, those who don't, you know, whatever the case is, if someone who's an elected official or appointed official is unwilling to come to the table on this, then frankly, they need to be replaced. And put someone in a position of leadership who will care about the community, who will take in, you know, be objective in the sense that they're not looking out for their own interests. Police unions have so much power, and our officials are you know, subject to that too and are bought out by these people. So unless we have real humans representing real humans, unless we have real representation, I'm not just talking about, we're talking about representation. We need non-binary, trans, people of color, Black and Indigenous people in these elected official positions, so we don't have all this BS that's happening. We need people who aren't just affluent, who have the right networks. I remember during a Board of Supervisor meeting, I don't know if it was Gore or Rabbit or someone, they said, you know, what's the barrier of people getting into elected office? And they're like, oh, they just need to know how to network. Well, let's be real, that's not the case. You can network all day and night, but who would want to network with you unless you had something to offer them, right? So if big businesses, wineries, et cetera, is who's gonna help you get into office, who would want to network with me, right? So how do we make these positions more accessible and not elitist? I also want to point out that this is, I do want to have community comment on this. I see that there's 2 hands raised currently of folks who want to chime in on this, and I'm all for it. I'm not sure about the panelists, but I really want to hear someone else's voice besides mine. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Libya and Delashay, I do see you have your hands up, but in the interest of time, we're going to have Lorez ask one more question, and then we're going to proceed with the meeting so that we could also hear from the attendees.
You know, as I've been listening to everyone, and I think that in some ways everyone has addressed this question, but I think just to make it clear and succinct, and if we could also try to keep our answers as succinct as possible for this question so that we have time just to have allow the CAC to ask questions. Okay, drum roll, I feel like, for this question. What do you think are the top 2 most important steps that we need to take to restore trust with the law enforcement in our community? So what do you think are just two steps that need to happen? It could be on the community's end or law enforcement's end, but what do you think 2 steps that we could use to move forward in the near future to help build and restore trust? Okay, Delashay, did you have your hand for this one? Okay, so I'm going to start with you, then Libby, and then Kimmy. And then we'd like to open it up to Angel, and then we'd like to, once again, if you could keep your answers succinct, please, so that we can open it up to the CAC and then have public comment. Thank you.
I think the first step would be to realize that race and history matter. What we've been doing hasn't been working. So we have to learn from history and move forward. I tend to tell people you can't buy yesterday's newspaper, but you could plan for the future. So we need some commitment and we need resources. And we need to realize that, second, that Restores Justice initiative is encompassed not only, like for SRJC, it wouldn't be just the students' behavior, but the behavior of the staff and school policies. It's not a quick fix. You're not going to do it in 2 answers. So we need some ongoing professionalism development, some coaching, some peer mentoring, professional learning communities. We need to school ourselves, both ends. We need to educate ourselves and dialogue. So I'm going to say commitment and resources, because unless the community is committed to do these changes, and unless we have the resources to make these changes, changes aren't going to happen. So my answer would be commitment and resources. It's a different subject. There's no quick fix.
Yeah, well, we know this we could spend every day, all day, going into this subject. So we're trying our best to bite off bits and pieces. And that's why I think if we can, each person or whoever like speaking, come up with those 2 concrete things. What I feel like is it is very important to have a space to share experiences, but I also feel like it's really important to have some next steps or some solution driven type of work, but also so that people can find ways to lean in and dig in and support some of these ideas of the what next. Next, Libby.
One thing the cops can do is quit their jobs, frankly. The other thing that actually can be done is they quit their relationship with Lexapol. That is an outsourced model of policy that is from Southern California that is now based in Texas, that is designed to give law enforcement the least amount of legal trouble in their activities. So if we want to have any kind of change that is doable right now, effectively quit that relationship right now.
Thank you, Libby. Kimmy?
I'm trying to think of like actual feasible, tangible things to do right now. There's so much that needs to be done in general, including dismantling the system. I know that's more long game stuff. I think first of all that we as community members need to vote in Measure P, and at the very least the Board of Supervisors needs to actually put in some sort of protections that gives ILR office the means it needs to have effective oversight of the police. We keep having these police brutality cases and they go nowhere. I mean, the case of Windsor, man having his head smashed in, that's about to be dismissed. Like, the sheriff is asking for that to be dismissed. There's no accountability. So the first thing we need, everyone vote yes on Measure P, get that put across. If that doesn't win for whatever reason, COVID, the Board of Supervisors needs to put in some measures in place because we need effective oversight, or we will continue to have cases like Jeremiah Chass, like David Ward, like Branch Roth, like Andy Lopez. I think the next thing we need to do is start looking at how we can redistribute funds from the sheriff's office into community programs to a similar model like Cahoots or something similar, because really what law enforcement is, it's just policing crime that's already happened. It's not addressing the root and cause of what is known as crime, which a lot of it is public health issues and mental health issues. Let's be real. We need to bolster our mental health. We need to bolster our social services and access to social services. So that community members have the resources they need to get through the tough times that they are facing, that then leads to 911 being called because someone's having a mental break, which then leads to someone dying. We don't need people to die. So I would say effective oversight, yes on Measure P, everyone. Sorry, I'm going to plug that one more time. We talk about the Human Rights Report. I said that 1,000 times, I'm not going to say that again. But start redistributing, reallocating money from law enforcement into the community that will actually support us during difficult times.
And Angel.
I agree with everything that Kimmy just said. I think the funds need to be reallocated, and there need to be different types of programs that respond to the police calls, because police wear too many hats. They're not lawyers, they're not therapists, they're not mental health specialists, and they're constantly sent out to take care of these people, and they make mistakes, The second thing to do would be just clean up the police. Get rid of the bad apples. We don't need the guys that are here continuously causing harm. We don't need them to get raises and promotion. And I'd also like to ask that, even though it has not been pushed yet, SB 731, not allowing cops who have already committed crimes in other places to move on and go somewhere else and work somewhere else. Stop hiring people outside of county if you know they have issues in other counties and allowing them to come and police and brutalize our people in this community. If doctors and lawyers have to lose their certifications for making, violations on people's human rights, so should the police.
Thank you, Lorena. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you, Lorez. Thank you, everyone, for your input. At this time, I want to ask the CAC members who are present if they have any questions for the panelists before we move on to hear what our attendees have to say. Do any of the CAC members have any comments or questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Evan Zelig because he does a great job with public comment. And how much time do you think we should give people?
Yeah, at this point, we're gonna try to do 3 minutes each, and let's see. People may have less time than that, but we'll definitely stop it at 3 minutes. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. Your insight, your experience, your histories are invaluable in these discussions, and your appearance here, your presence, your participation, your activism is much appreciated. Your work is much appreciated, and sharing it with the CAC, allowing it to be heard on a much bigger scale, allowing it to be heard by people who may not otherwise be able to hear it, is very important. And so thank you to all of you for coming to our panel this evening, and for at least starting this discussion on restorative justice, restorative process, figuring out where to start this recovery, and what things can be done to work towards policy changes and effective changes for change. I know that's what we're all working towards, and it's invaluable to hear the different opinions and the different input from all of you. Thank you. I'm just going to go down the list of people that I have, and when I call your name, please tell us your name, as well as if you are representing any organization, which one. And we're going to go ahead and give everybody 3 minutes. And I'm going to start with, I believe it's Karim Sanchez, Karim Sanchez. Are you there? Is there a way to unmute? There we go. Okay,
Hello?
great. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name is Karim Sanchez. I'm with the North Bay Organizing Project, and I first wanted to express gratitude that this conversation is happening. You know, I think restorative justice encourages more empathy and compassion, which we ultimately need in our community. So I'm grateful that we're having this conversation. But restorative justice, in its truest sense, I believe would be the people most impacted, right? So if we took Andy Lopez as an example, it would be his family sitting in circle with Deputy Eric Gelhaus, discussing the real human impacts that the loss of a human life had, right? And then figure out a way to make amends for that. And everything that gets further away from that is really watering down that restorative justice process, right? And I think that's what's difficult about this conversation is how do we take this process that we know works really well in individual cases, like Eric Gelhaus shooting down Andy Lopez, and apply it to these larger social problems that we face with the community mistrust of law enforcement. And so I'm grateful that we're trying to figure that out, but a lot of what I was hearing is really what we want to see as a result of a restorative justice process. And if we can't get folks to even come to the table to have a discussion where we're talking about the community impacts, the needs that come out of those impacts, and whose responsibility is it to meet those needs, then I don't know that we can get to a place where we're talking about what do we really need to heal. So I'm struggling to see what that really is, but I'm grateful that we're trying it out. Also, I just want to flag that a lot of what I was hearing is also acknowledging that these incidents don't happen in a vacuum, right? There's also this notion of transformative justice that takes into account that when Deputy Eric Gelhaus gunned down Andy Lopez, he was also a young brown man in a young brown boy in the port side of town, right? It was in Moreland, right? So all of these things have to be addressed in order for real community healing to happen. So again, I'm grateful that this conversation has happened, but am concerned about it being watered down for it to really be effective. Thank you.
Thank you. That was right on the 3 minutes, and thank you for your comments. The next person I'm going to for public comment, it just says Jonathan. Jonathan, if once you're unmuted, go ahead. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Stone. I'm a resident of Santa Rosa for about 4 years now. And I just want to kind of cut to the point and just say restorative justice is just another cop-out for payoffs. It's kind of half-assed measure. And whenever there is a crime convicted on somebody, justice really isn't felt by the family until justice is served upon the person who caused the crime. And for us to start the conversation of how do we start the communication between the people, the police is hold the police accountable for their actions. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you for very much, Jonathan. The next person on the list for public comment is Courtney Mulroy. Courtney Mulroy.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you to the community leaders here like Kimmy and Angel and De La Shea and Libby for your input and for leading the movement in Santa Rosa. Your leadership has been invaluable and we can't thank you enough. I'm here to represent the doctors, nurses, and mental health professionals and public health community of HPEACE. We are healthcare providers for equality and community engagement in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. I'm personally a clinical quality manager for Medicare. And the examples of deaths and harm that Kimmy read off earlier is just one small percentage of the reason that we say racism and police brutality is a major, excuse me, public health crisis. This has everything to do with our healthcare providers as well in this community. Black men are twice as likely to be killed by police as white men. The community with disabilities we've seen is mistreated time and time again by the police force. It's absolutely unacceptable in a major public health crisis. The medical field and the public health fields, we use data, patient feedback, clinical studies, and more to determine how to best care for the public. And then those processes, those feedback avenues and those studies are reevaluated time and time again for accountability and for learning. And these fields are as guilty as any as upholding systems of racism. But the difference is we're willing to learn, to be held accountable, and to come to the table. We have a long way to go, and our mandatory diversity training isn't the answer. I want us to be held accountable to be better, and I want the cops to be held accountable to be better and want to have that. But we can't do our work while our patients are worried about racism, while they're worried about police sweeping their tent at night where their only home is. If they're worried about the safety of getting pulled over by a cop, we can't talk to them about managing their blood sugar with that over their heads. So these need to both be working together. And there does need to be an overhaul of the system. It's not working. I've been actively involved in anti-racist work as a white woman for 12 years, and I still have a long way to go. So one training or one class, that doesn't make the difference. The police force needs to be held accountable by the community they serve. I want a timeline of commitments, of actions, of learning, of hiring a representative group, of retraining, of updated firing procedures, goals, and metrics to evaluate the success of that program, just like we do in the medical field. There's no room for bad apples in law enforcement right now, and we need restorative justice. A police force who isn't fragile to criticism and being held accountable, and a police force who's solution-driven, like Lorez said, that wants to do better, and that lays out that they're gonna change this dynamic of police brutality as soon as possible. And the BIPOC community needs to be there every step of the way with their voice being heard and directing that every single step of the way. So thank you again from HPEACE. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Courtney. The next person for public comment is listed here as Lee. Lee. Go ahead, Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I have a lot. First of all, I want to be grateful for this conversation, but I'm feeling a little like it's being grateful that someone did the dishes after you begging and begging and begging them to do the dishes for months. I have been privileged in my life in many ways, the color of my skin, my education, but I also suffer from mental illness. And I know that my privilege is why I was able to get disability. My privilege is why I'm not dead. I would like to see immediate action taken. I want to see defunding the police and funding community. I want to see Kimmy, Delashay, Libby, every single one of these panelists listen to. I want to see them on the boards. I want to see, I'm done. I'm a white woman who has suffered a drop comparatively, but I still have suffered from this system myself. And it is time, it is past time to start helping our community. Oh gosh. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. I also want to see anti-racism work. The person before spoke eloquently about it being ongoing. It is ongoing. I think that those of us who do that ongoing work uncover things all the time that we wish we weren't uncovering. But I want to see the Board of Supervisors, the city councils, I want to see those people actually realizing that they're making mistakes and actually being accountable and actually knowing and actually speaking as if they've done anti-racism work. I want to see all of this change, and it's so far past due, and we are in such an incredible crisis in our communities. And I really, yeah, I want to see these panelists supported. I want to see defunding the police. I want to see our communities healthier and stronger, and I don't want people to be scared anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. The next person that I'm going to is listed here as Cecilia. And then for those who did just speak, if you could lower your hands on the Zoom app. I'm not sure, it is showing Courtney and Lee still up. I'm not sure if that's just an error on our end. But we're going to go ahead to move to Cecilia now for public comment.
Hi, thank you. I just first off want to acknowledge the immense emotional and mental labor that Kimmy and Delashay and Angel and Libby are doing. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. You are doing so much emotional and mental labor for us. You do not owe this to us, and we are so grateful for the work that you're doing. I strongly support defunding the police. I know that this conversation has touched on that. It's gone to other things, but truly, if we're talking about undoing oppression, we got to defund the oppressors. That is just the core of what it is. This is the main issue at hand. It's the most harm that's being done directly, violence onto our people of color, our friends in our community. And that is the first thing that needs to happen. And I know that that sounds radical, but it really is what has to happen. We've just seen too much violence across the board. Their funding is unbelievable compared to what happens in the rest of this community. And we need support in housing. We need support in mental health care. We need support in physical health care. All of those things require a lot more than what they're getting right now. And defunding the police is an easy first step. Also, again, I've been to a lot of these meetings, and there are a lot of white people at the table. And just like all of these panelists of color have brought up, it is not accurate representation when you do not have the people who are being oppressed at the table to discuss what's happening to them. This is just prevalent across Sonoma County, and that needs to be something that the people in power have in their minds when they're making decisions and appointing new people and promoting people. I would love to see more public endorsements from the white people on every single city council meeting, board of supervisors meeting, this meeting. It would be great to see some endorsements of Measure P publicly, endorsements of defunding the police, just speaking out publicly so that there is more support, because we do have an incredibly racist county that we're up against. I don't know if many of you are keeping up with the violence that's happening against the protesters and the peaceful marchers, but we've had upwards of maybe nearly a dozen cars trying to run our people over. So this is prevalent in every aspect of this county, and every small step that the white supervisors and city council meetings have brought up is just not enough to take on the immense weight of the racism in this county. Taking power away from the oppressors seems like the most important and urgent thing. So I'm asking, please really do the work to defund the police. That's not the end goal, that's the now goal. We need it sooner rather than later, as in right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. The next person we're going to go to public comment, Anne Marie Daniels. Anne Marie Daniels.
Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, so my name is Anne Marie Daniels. I am a mixed race woman. I'm Black, Filipino, Irish, and Cherokee, and I live in Petaluma, California. I also am glad that we're having this conversation, but I am just kind of thinking of it in like a metaphor sort of state, because we're having these conversations of like, what do we do if someone doesn't want to participate in restorative justice? Well, let's play this old house. This old house is 400 years old. It was built on stolen land and built on a racist foundation. Now let's talk about the roof and what protects us and keep us safe. Let's call that the trust for law enforcement. Every time over the 400 years, every death at the hands of law enforcement is like a shot of a bullet through that roof, through the trust. And over time, the rain, let's call that more racism, drips through the house into the house that was already built on a racist foundation. And that's rotting the studs of mental health and economic equality. How do we fix the house? Well, if it gets too bad, you have to tear down the house. It's not worth fixing anymore. We might have waited too long, but if there is a rotten stud, remove it. If there is a cop with any kind of misconduct, remove it. You need to have a clean state before you're able to restore the justice. That's my comment. That's the way that I'm thinking about it. I hope that helps you guys kind of understand what's trying to be done when you talk about a holistic, equal, restorative justice. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Anne Marie. The next person for public comment will be Sal Alvarez. Sal Alvarez.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. I first want to commend the panel members, Kimmy, Libby, Angel, and Delashay for their work and energy that they have all put into creating greater police oversight. As a trans community member, I want to call in people on this board for their lack of knowledge and seemingly lack of willingness to learn. I noticed that you purposefully speak about Libby in the third person instead of using her pronouns, and it is not okay. The culture of policing that attracts cisgender, heterosexual white men is the problem. You give the most entitled group of citizens in America guns, uniforms, minimal training, and authority, and this is what we end up with. This cannot be reformed by adding women or queer people to the police force. It can only be changed by dismantling it completely and building something new that centers the community first and posits officers as what they claim to be, which is public servants. You asked what can be done now. The sheriff's office can publicly endorse Measure P in an effort to show the community that they actually care about oversight, and they can rescind the lawsuit that has been filed against the Board of Supervisors. You can fire all cops that have been found guilty for domestic violence or any other violence against women. Restorative justice is intersectional, and creating inclusive space for all people, queer and trans included, is the center of healing the trauma that we face as marginalized groups. And I just want to say to all the cisgender members on this board, you need to be including your pronouns in your bios. Singling Libby out as the only person that you stated their pronouns is absolutely unacceptable. It is absolutely unacceptable. You are not doing the work. You are not doing the work at all. This is not an inclusive space for queer and trans people, and it is not okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next person to give public comment here, it's just a phone number. Last number is 0694. Please state your name and the organization you're with, if any.
Hi, this is Jim Duffy. I'm not with any organization. I want to start off by thanking the CAC for holding this important panel. And I want to thank the panelists for coming and delivering a heavy dose of truth to this Community Advisory Council. I do want to once again state the name Donald Miller. He was the community member, our community member here in Sonoma County that was killed in this past month by the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office on August 15th. And I may have missed it. I wasn't paying 100% attention at the beginning of the meeting, but I noticed that we held up a lot of names and I didn't hear his name held up. So I wanted to do that. It was a mental health call, and they tased him repeatedly and killed him. I want to encourage the Community Advisory Council to hold a hearing on the Human Rights Council or Commission's report that was mentioned multiple times during tonight's panel. That report was issued 3 months ago, and it's long past time that this council, as the body that does oversight of law enforcement, specifically the sheriffs in this county, holds a hearing on it. I also think that we need to postpone the annual report scheduled for the 15th because it's supposed to be released for 30 days for the public to review it. And it sounds like the sheriff dragged his feet again on the office. Director Navarro needs to meet with him to discuss this annual report again. So I'm hoping it can be postponed. And then also I've heard a number of members, number of people call for people to vote for Measure P. I am a supporter of Measure P, and I want to encourage the Community Advisory Council members to become public endorsers of Measure P and put it out on, you can go to socoeffectiveoversight.org and click the endorse link and, be public about supporting better oversight for the office in which you sit. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim. The next person we will call for public comment is listed here as Francis Varian. Francis?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this meeting. I am an activist, and I've been working with restorative justice for a while now, so I want to say thank you for having this meeting. And I also just want to say it's a very complex issue, restorative justice. It's not a one meeting issue for sure. And we maybe need some clarity here because there's two different veins that I'm confused about. There's restorative justice for community on community violence, which we would use to dismantle the prison industrial system. Then there's restorative justice for when the police are harming us. And that's a whole different ballgame, right? So what I suggest maybe is a continuing conversation with actually very inclusive membership, because I as a queer Sonoman, I gotta say, I don't see us, I don't hear us. There are mayors in this county who refer to transgender people as it, and there's nobody condemns them. It's horrifying. And also as a disabled and chronically ill member of this community, knowing that like 1 in 4 police fatalities are like mentally ill people, we need a diverse group of folks here at this table to talk about restorative justice and what it means to us and for us as a community. But I hear you about the concrete, next steps. I hear you, because that is important too. And so I suggest we have an ongoing community conversation that's actually inclusive and diverse. And what I would ask, because I see you here tonight, Deputy, and I appreciate it, can you commit to us? One step that would feel great to me is if you could commit to protecting us as we protest in the streets. Can you commit to not gassing us, shooting us, letting other people run us over or hold knives to us? With all due respect, that is actually just your job and the law, and it's not happening. So that would feel great if you were like ready to come to the table and be like, yeah, we got your back. Even if you're protesting us, we've got your back the same way we got the back of the people who protest against you. That would feel amazing. And then the other thing that would feel great is for the advisory council to publicly endorse P and to really work as a community to make sure that our government reflects us, looks like us, sounds like us, knows us, because it is us. Because I'll tell you something, we don't get half a person break when we pay taxes, right? We don't pay less taxes than the white, straight, cis-het, affluent people of this county. We have to pay the same amount of taxes, but we're not getting treated in the same way, and we're aware of it. It's painful, and to restore a sense of justice in our community, we need actual commitment and action. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the community members, and that's it. Have a good night.
Great. Thank you very much, Francis. The next person for public comment, and thank you everybody for keeping your comments under the 3 minutes. It is appreciated since we do have so many people who wish to be heard. The next person is Michael B. I can't see the rest of the name right now, but it says Michael Barnes. Michael Barnes.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Michael.
Yes, I'm a biracial person, resident of Santa Rosa. And I do believe that we need to prohibit the ability for law enforcement to be elected to city and county positions when they're out of law enforcement. I think that we need to do what we can to limit the power of police unions, because I believe police unions do protect those bad apples. I think that we do need to adopt a co-responder model of mental health professionals paired with officers, and I think the mental health professionals and the officers need to come from the communities that they serve. And I agree. They mentioned Eugene, Oregon, the Cahoots model. Denver also has a co-responder model similar that cost the city $2 million or less and has been instrumental in helping the city deal with mental health issues. And they've just extended that program. And I do think that we do need more civilian oversight, such as ILRO, and I agree that this council should publicly endorse Measure P.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Is that all? Great. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate your comments. Keith Reinhardt, K. Reinhardt, please go ahead and give us your public comment once they unmute you. Great. Thanks,
Hey.
Keith.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I want to thank you guys for putting on this great event. And I want to thank the community members who participated. So I really appreciate that. It was a great discussion, and I wasn't going to call in except for your first public commenter. All right. So I want to say this guy's name, hashtag Donald Timothy Miller. That's the gentleman that Jim spoke about. So say his name, Donald Timothy Miller. That's the latest in the count. Okay. So your first speaker kind of brought everything back to the Andy Lopez incident 7 years ago. And I just want to amplify his comments in that as far as the community is concerned, it doesn't matter how many millions of dollars we spent building a park or pretending to have better dialogue with our sheriff's department. It's still an unresolved and very emotional issue for a wide swath of 20-somethings and probably their parents and their grandparents in that community. So you're talking 60, 80, 100, maybe over 200 people affected by that death. And his compatriots, his colleagues are now 20 years old and they're learning about life. So I just wanted to point back to that eloquent first speaker and remember that's why we are all here, is because Andy's life was taken from him unjustly. And let's not forget that that's still a wound in our community that continues to fester. And thank you again, community members. That's it.
Thank you very much, Keith. The next person that is up for public comment, Sarah.
Yes, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
My name is Sarah Casmith, they, them pronouns, fabulous. And I am the interim board president for the North Bay Organizing Project. And I want to give my thanks and love to all the previous trans speakers. Appreciate y'all being present here tonight. That's incredibly important. Something I find extremely interesting about tonight is that the conversation that happened here looks so much like the conversation that takes place more broadly. The questions being asked were centered around rebuilding the relationship between the community and the police. Having the power to write the questions means that you're leading the conversation and holding a position of power within the conversation. And y'all made no adjustment to what was actually happening. The fact that several panelists were able to assert their narrative and vision despite this is incredibly commendable. That's essentially what things look like more broadly. You know, we aren't getting to actually be a part of the conversation. We're getting a slot and able to speak, but that's not really a conversation. And tonight was the equivalent to direct action and is just as necessary as direct action. Also, restorative practices are not possible while harm is still being done. So if we want to be bringing in restorative justice to this conversation, we need to revisit what that practice is all about. This first step here is to stop the harm. And what that actually means is weakening and overhauling the system with the ultimate goal of dismantling it, because a system built on a foundation of violence can only ever produce violence. That is their job, and they do it every day, just like the police are planning to tomorrow at 6 a.m. at Cancer Park, sweeping another encampment again. Just all we are seeing from them is violence. IOLERO is the tiniest step toward creating accountability in this county, and the community needs to protect itself by voting in favor of Measure P. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, let me just reset my timer here. Okay, the next individual for public comments is Colin Metcalf. Colin?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Colin.
All right, my name is Colin Metcalf. I'm a lifetime resident of Santa Rosa. I was born and raised here in Coffee Park. And I want to echo partially what the last caller said, where this conversation is very oriented around trying to build trust with the law enforcement community. And I think we are long past that. The law enforcement community killed Andy Lopez. The law enforcement community killed Jeremiah Chas. The law enforcement community killed David Ward and Donald Miller. And I honestly don't think that we can trust you anymore. The organization that Brandon Cutting is here representing killed all of these people. And I think if you want to talk about like what one of the members of the CAC talked about earlier, how they said, oh, you know, the code doesn't say peace officers, it just says like officers. I don't believe that officers have the ability to be peace officers. They're walking around with firearms, they're walking around with tasers. They're out there to kill folks that they are afraid of. We need to move away. If you want to talk about concrete steps, right? 2 concrete steps, we need to be moving away from a fear-oriented climate where police officers can just pull their gun and fire rounds into somebody's back. Or in the case of Andy Lopez, I believe the entire encounter took place like under 15 seconds from when folks stepped out of the car to when they killed a kid. Less than a minute. These are not peace officers, and they never have been. And if you want to talk about turning them into peace officers, let's take away their weapons. Let's take away their less than lethal weapons as well. Let's move into a state where instead of doing this whole crime and punishment thing where somebody commits a crime and we go in and we say like, if you resist arrest, we will kill you. And if you don't resist arrest, then we're going to drag you off to jail where we will ruin your life. We need to approach people who are committing crimes and say, you committed this crime likely because you need something. There's something that in your life you don't have that needs to be provided for you. And we want to approach you and say, how can we help? Like, how can we make your life better? Instead of just saying, how can we ruin your life? How can we murder you in the street because the color of your skin is darker? It's insane. Like, I mean, this continues to happen, and yet folks are talking about, oh, we need to build trust with law enforcement. There is no trust with law enforcement, and I don't know if there ever will be. I know that I cannot trust police officers and the sheriff's department. I was in a protest in Oakland last week where I saw Oakland police officers threatening protesters, and I know I refused to step anywhere near, even within 5 feet of them, because I could not trust them. They all had their hands on their batons. Oh, sorry, that was already.
Yeah, that's the 3 minutes. Thank you, Colin. I appreciate the comments. We appreciate it. Again, if we do have to cut somebody off, my apologies. It's obviously not personal. We definitely want to get to all of our public comments, and it is limited to 3 minutes. The next person listed is Joe Bell, is how it's listed. Joe Bell.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jolie, and I am a member of, I live in Sonoma County. I also feel, you know, I want to thank everybody, all of the panelists here and community leaders. I thank you guys so much. I look up to you so much. You do amazing work. What I want to bring up specifically is restorative justice. Like many people said, I feel like we're way past a point of building trust and, you know, this type of communication with law enforcement as in our county. It's not working. It clearly doesn't want to happen from the other side. I want to specifically bring up, I was looking through the Board of Supervisors meeting a few weeks ago, and I saw an agenda item on there which concerned me. It was an agenda item that was titled Adult Detention Behavioral Health Unit Project Labor Agreement. And this is, as I dug into it further, I found that it says, in 2015, the County of Sonoma received $40 million in state bond funding to construct a new adult detention behavioral health facility. So that means that Sonoma County has received this bond. We have Sonoma County and our Board of Supervisors has committed to also putting a matching 10% funding towards this new behavioral health facility, which will be built next to our jail. It will house more people. I don't believe, I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. If we're talking about restorative justice, like, why aren't we talking about how we don't want this? Like, this is not the direction we want to go in our county. Why on all of these Board of Supervisors meeting has this never been brought up? Why isn't anybody talking about this, that we're about to spend lifetimes worth of money to uphold this facility as a county when we are talking about wanting to defund the police and refund the people? I don't understand. This is so frustrating. It feels like a bad movie. So while we're having these conversations, this is the stuff that's going on behind the scenes that is not being discussed. It's not being put out in the open. We're talking about putting the sheriff's department in charge of a new, I will tell you how big this facility is going to be. This facility will be a 32,000 square foot, 72 bed mental health detention facility attached to the main adult detention facility, scheduled for occupancy in winter of 2023. So as we are demanding for restorative justice and demanding for change, our Board of Supervisors and our Sheriff's Department is planning to build a mental health facility when you guys are killing Jeremiah Chaz, Donald Miller just weeks ago. And this is the discussion. We're asking you to implement programs like Cahoots. We have the money. If we're willing to match a 10% of a $40 million bond.
Thank you for your public comments. Thank you, Jolene.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a few more people whose hands have been raised. The next three is going to be 3 minutes each. And then I am seeing new hands pop up. So we are going to have to limit that. After the next three, it will be limited to 2 minutes because we do have a lot of public comment we do want to get to. Go ahead, Ashley. Please begin speaking when you can.
Hi, I'm calling in because we need to defund the police and refund the community. The police, the system is not broken. The system was built to go against us, to oppress us the whole time. So we need something that is built for us, by us. You know, it's people who care about the community. It's people who wants, who has gone through the struggles, who has gone through the abuse of police brutality, who has gone through police brutality. They need to be the ones that need to be heard.
I don't know why we're still having this discussion. It's ridiculous. We're all tired of having the same conversations with you guys, and you guys are not listening to us. I yield my time.
Thank you, Ashley. The next person for public comment is Emma Hughes.
Hi.
Hi, Emma. Thank you.
Hi. I think that the beginning of this recovery is acknowledging the pain that's been caused by the police department and the sheriff's department. I'm an 18-year-old SRJC student, and I've been listening to both city and county meetings, and the way that Chief Navarro and Sheriff Essex speak is incredibly disingenuous and downright dismissive. They continue to double down on their law and order rhetoric and unequivocally stand by their use of force. To begin real restorative justice, we need to remove conservative colonial money out of Sonoma County politics like the Gallaghers and Jim Jordan. I think the white affluent portion of this area has a major apathy problem. The pain of this community is power washed to fit the status quo every single day. We need to do the uncomfortable work and input anti-racism, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-sexual harassment training within every law enforcement, and that is the bare minimum. Protesters have been targeted, attacked, and injured both by law enforcement and right-wing extremists. I have been physically present for at least 7 car-related incidents, and if people drove into cops like they have driven into us, the drivers would have been shot dead. But when the sheriff calls mandatory mask ordinances, and excuse my language, bullshit, for a disease that wildly disproportionately affects people of color in Sonoma County, it is evident that these officials do not have our best interests in mind. Please encourage City Council to discuss the Human Rights Report, encourage the success of Measure P, and call out Sheriff Essex attempts to block Measure P for what they are, fascist. Thank you, panel members, for having this conversation. I yield my time.
Thank you, Emma. The next individual for 3-minute comments is Lana, and following Lana, or Lana, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, the comments will be 2 minutes each after this speaker. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Hey, my name's Lana. This has been a really, really good talk. I really appreciate all of the panelists here. Though it started, the first panelist introduced themselves at 51 minutes. So I'm just gonna give my 3 minutes to any panelists that might want to talk about any of the questions or statements that have come up since the public comment. So I yield my rest of my 3 minutes to the panelists.
Thank you. Seeing no hands raised, we're gonna move on unless there is a panelist that wishes to use that time that's been yielded. I don't see any hands raised from our panelists. We're going to move on. The next individual is, and again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing this.
Hands raised, actually. Evan, there are hands raised. There are definitely 6 more hands raised.
I'm sorry?
There are definitely 6 more hands raised.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to thank everybody that's been calling in so far. I think it's really important to have our voices heard. I'm hearing that there are a lot of similar sentiments that I hear across the community members, not just the ones who have been calling in. And I think it's really important to uphold your voices. So I really want to encourage you to keep calling in and keep sharing these on public platforms where they are recorded, where they are part of the record, because at the end of the day, when change needs to happen now. And no one can look back on this and say that we weren't speaking. We have been speaking. Now it's our elected officials to determine whether or not they will hear us, or we have to take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimmy. It looks like, and again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing this name wrong, Rigel Bowen?
Rigel, thank you.
Thank you, Rigel.
Hi, so I'm a 41-year resident of Sonoma County, and I just have more of a concern. My biggest concern here is how this discussion has completely glossed over the need for reparations, as noted by Kimmy and Libby, Angel and Delachey. And it keeps being brought around to the concept of how the police can build trust in the community. The people most marginalized here have spoken over and over about how the trust with the police can not only not be rebuilt, it was never there to begin with. This system is not broken. It doesn't need repair. It is operating as designed and has no place at the table to begin with, let alone a seat. Authority and leadership is a gift, and it's something that officers like Deputy Cutting on this panel, who has not said a single word, do not deserve. Here's what can be done. The police must give up their fight. They must revoke Officer Eric Gelhaus's pension, acknowledge the human rights report, and give the community what it is due, respect and peace through your absence. Thank you.
Thank you, Rigel. Delashay, I see that your hand is raised on the Zoom app. Was there something that you wanted to say as well?
I just want to say the same thing that Kimmy was saying, thanking all the callers for calling in. This is some incredible feedback from the community, and I'm hoping that Mr. Cutting is going to take that back to his workplace, and I would suggest that you listen to your president. Clean up your swamp. It needs to be cleaned.
Thank you. The next person, so just so everybody here is aware, there's right now 6 hands raised for public comment. After those 6, we are not going to take any more public comment. I am closing it after these 6 just because of the time. And we do have panelists who have joined us who have to go as well, and CAC members with other obligations. So Chris, if you could go ahead and speak, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a Santa Rosa resident, and I just want to say that I think I'm speaking for a lot of us when I say that we will never trust the police. Due to my own personal experiences and because of the behavior of law enforcement that I have witnessed at protests over the past few months, there will be no rebuilding of trust. Our long-term goal is the abolition of the police. But for now, we want to see public support for Measure P from you, and we're going to continue pushing for the defunding of the police. And like some callers asked earlier, Cutting, if you could, I don't know, get your people on board and actually protect us at protests and stop letting people trying to kill us, that'd be great. Like people have told you before, that's your job. You don't get to protect just the people that like you. I yield my time.
Thank you. The next person for speaking public comment, Rex. Rex, go ahead when you are available.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you, Rex.
Okay. I'm really emotional, pardon me. Yeah, reparations are due. They have been due since this country was built on the backs of BIPOC people without their fucking consent. Pardon my French. And yeah, the most basic thing in this incredibly gay community that we live in and trans community that we live in would be just using people's pronouns, cisgender or transgender. And yeah, there's never going to be trust from the police. Never. They have been assaulting, murdering, raping, and hurting all communities across this country since their inception. No one will ever trust them except for people with money who have property that's being protected. That's all.
Thank you, Rex. Charlotte, please give your public comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Charlotte.
All right, thanks. So my name is Charlotte Borg. I'm a longtime resident of Santa Rosa. I want to start by saying that I am white, I am mentally ill, and I am trans, just to contextualize my statements. I definitely agree that we need more trans voices in these conversations, specifically Black trans voices. There is a distinct vacuum of those voices in these conversations, and I think it's really important that we include the most persecuted within our community in making change. It seems, just on a larger note, as though the discussion is being framed around how we can repair a relationship between the community and law enforcement, and I'm concerned about that framing. There has not ever been a good relationship between law enforcement and marginalized communities in the United States, let alone in Sonoma County. What needs to happen is a redistribution of funding and massively increased levels of oversight on law enforcement offices. The sheriff immediately started looking into litigation against the county upon Measure B being put on the ballot. And that's extremely telling about his priorities and his officers' priorities. This is and always has been an adversarial relationship, and what the county needs to do is to shift its priorities tangibly by moving what they put money into. Right now, the county currently demonstrates that it values the sheriff's office the most, and I want to see that priority be the members of the community, and specifically uplifting those who need the most help. Thank you to the panelists for their input tonight, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. We're going to hear from 3 more public speakers. Kokomi Makemi, if I'm pronouncing that right, which I'm probably not, I apologize. Kokomi?
It's pronounced Kokomi.
Kokomi, thank you, I apologize. Please go ahead, you have 2 minutes for public comment whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Kokomi Makemi. I'm a sophomore at Santa Rosa High School. My pronouns are she, her. As a youth in our community, I would like to say what reflects many of our views, which is to divest in law enforcement. We are coming up as a generation that is being exposed to the atrocities that have occurred at the hands of law enforcement. Unless something is done, we will grow up in a Sonoma County where there is no trust between us and law enforcement. The youth demand action. We want to live out our futures in a safe Sonoma County in which the irresponsibilities of the Sheriff's Department is no longer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next person is Joshua Poinsett. Joshua?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Joshua.
Okay. My name is Joshua Mandela Poinsett. I'm an SRJC student and the executive of legislation at the BSC there. I moved to Sonoma County when I was 9.5 years old from Modesto, and this is by far the most racist place I've ever lived in my entire life, which is surprising since it has supposedly such a low crime rate, which is also embarrassing if that's really how it's supposed to be. Now, I've heard this conversation that's been going on here recently about talking about forming better relations among the police and civilians. One of the solutions was having communities have their own law enforcement. Well, that's not going to work because the idea of community law enforcement is so that the law enforcement will represent that neighborhood because that neighborhood is the police. And that probably would work, but neighborhoods in Sonoma County are mainly just white people living there with very few minorities, maybe 2 or 3 families there that are Black or Latino. And then when you take that into account, it's not going to be protecting us because we're not going to be able to protect ourselves. It's just not logical. It's not us who are the police. Doesn't make any sense. That's all I got to say for right now.
Thank you, Joshua. Our last public commenter for the evening is going to be Natalie. Natalie, go ahead. And to the 2 that are still raising their hands, I'm sorry that we don't have the time to get to you this evening. Natalie will be our last public comment for the evening.
Hello. I just wanted to say that I just wanted to repeat everything that all the previous speakers have said, and especially our panelists, all the effort that you guys have continuously done, not just on this panel, but continuously for our community. I thank you. And I am white. I use she, her pronouns. I have extreme amounts of privilege, and I'm related to officers, and I can say that I have lost significant trust for them. Learning that through training, you are taught to dominate one, to make them submit through going overboard with one layer of, with an extra, through fucking, excuse my language, through escalating the situation. You're not helping anybody. Warrior cops do not save lives. You do not. Through this, restorative justice is about accountability. And through our sheriff advocating for $50,000 to fight against that speaks volumes. There's nothing left that I can say. Placing officers to inspect their own wrongdoings, what does that say about our county? Who are they there for? They're protecting themselves and not our county. And that's That's gang activity is what it is, and it's unacceptable. I don't know why our community is accepting this. And well, actually I do, because it's the inherited racist culture. And if we aren't fighting to change that, we're fighting to keep it in place. And I need our community to do better. Our future is looking, our children are watching. I see the trust in our community, peace officers just disintegrating, and change needs to happen or else something else will happen. And the ball is in your guys' court. We're all fighting for this. You guys need to listen at this point. And if you aren't listening, if you aren't acting, what are you upholding? I don't understand. I yield my time. I hope what people have said has sunk in, not just me, but especially other people. Our panelists are what they have echoed for the rest of our community. I need that to sit with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you again to all of our panelists, to all of our speakers today who joined us, and to all of the members of the public who participated and joined our meeting as well. I apologize to those who wanted to give public comment that we're not able to get to this time. I would encourage you to email the CAC, email Iolero. Your comments will be read, will be considered, and please join us at future meetings as well to make your voices heard also. With that, again, thank you. This is, it was a powerful message that we got. I hope that this is only the beginning of our conversation with our community members, and I look forward to seeing all of you out there in the community and speaking with you much more. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Our next meeting will be October 5th at 6 p.m. And in the meantime, I wish everybody out there to be safe and well, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.